Ireland. So, Mark, Goramila Magat. And the next speaker, there's two ways of introducing Val Cummins. One is the orthodox way. She was a senior lecturer in biological sciences and all those great things. But really, the way to describe Val is that it was, for a while, the Minister for the Marine was Simon Coveney from Cork. The head of the Naval Service was Mark Mellett from Cork. And the third member of the Holy Trinity was Val Cummins. So Val is the Holy Ghost of Marine Ireland. And Val has recently jumped over the wall to keep the religious metaphor going and has joined Simply Blue. So we're really interested, Val, to hear all about Simply Blue, what you're doing. And your talk is about industry perspectives on the blue economy. So Val, Walter Rove, we defer to you.
Well, Micheál, Gurv Míle Maithagad. I've been called an awful lot worse, I think, so I'll take that. And that's quite an introduction. So I hope I don't disappoint. And following Mark de Fuita is some honour and some challenge. But áthas orm a bheith anseo livenú con lá Maradona agus Gurv Maithagad Údarás na Gaeltachta agus Park na Mara for the invitation. So I am delighted to have this chance to tell you a little bit about blue growth from an industry perspective. I'm just hoping that the screen is going to do what it needs to do and to share that. Can you see that now?
Yep, okay, good. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm as Micheál said, working now with Simply Blue Energy, having made a life-changing decision in this past year after 21 years in UCC and in research and academia to cross the Rubicon and go and work on the industry side. So this is a very new and exciting phase, and absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to experience life from a very different perspective. You talked earlier on, Micheál, about the ability to influence and to bring about change, and that it comes from the bottom up. And I think that small companies like Simply Blue Energy can and do absolutely punch above their weight. And we certainly are looking to deliver impact in relation to the whole world of blue growth. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So today I want to tell you a little bit about, I suppose, some of the key areas of interest for us, which relate to offshore wind, specifically floating wind, wave energy and aquaculture, all of which chime really well with the ambitions of Park na Mara and the vision that Mark presented for Maritime Ireland. And the Gaeltacht areas and the communities are absolutely pivotal to doing things differently. And I suppose what I want to start with is just a little bit of context in terms of where we are now. Mark talked about the importance of sustainability and sustainable development. And I think just thinking about the context in which we are operating fundamentally is so important. So we know from the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services last year that over 60% of our marine ecosystems globally are being degraded. We know that we are overfishing. From the Food and Agricultural Association, over 30% of our commercial fish stocks, and fishing 60% of those fish stocks to within their maximum sustainable yield. So really on the threshold and a tipping point of sustainability. So we're fundamentally, we're experiencing huge issues in terms of climate change, looking at what's going on with the wildfires on the west coast of the States. We're experiencing in the marine environment now new phenomena such as marine heat waves. There are major issues, for example, with an acidifying ocean and ocean acidification. So we're living in this period of the Anthropocene, where really it's humankind that are having the most fundamental impact on the planet above any other force or factor. So because we're changing the way the world works, we have to change the way that we think about it too. And that's in the context of our seas and oceans, which are fundamentally linked to the climate and the biodiversity existential crisis that we face. So we need to think about things differently. From an Irish point of view, we need to face the oceans. We need to stop turning our back to the sea, and I believe we're absolutely starting to achieve that now. And we need to embrace this concept of blue growth, which is really all about trying to reconcile the opportunities, the new opportunities that we can harness from the point of view of sustainability, but recognizing that there's an opportunity to deliver both economic growth and sustainable livelihoods, as well as environmental sustainability, and trying to find that sweet spot in terms of economy, environment, and society is central and must be central to how we think going forward. And it was great to hear Mark talking about those principles of sustainable development being at the core of the Park Namara concept and the values that are shaping the vision for that particular initiative. So blue growth, I have a PhD or had a PhD student working on this and looking at lots of different definitions. And a definition here is that it's about the sustainable development of marine resources. It's about generating livelihoods and securing social well-being. And it's very much focused on innovation in emerging marine sectors. So those sectors include things like marine biotechnology, marine renewable energy, thinking about new ways of getting protein from the sea, looking at things like offshore aquaculture, coastal tourism, etc. And goal 14 of the Sustainable Development Goals is very much the context in which the team at Simply Blue Energy here are operating. So to say a little bit about Simply Blue, we're a team of just over 30. We have recently set up our headquarters here in Cork, but we are distributed. We have staff working in Ardmore, in Newquay, in Pembrokeshire, in Edinburgh and in Oregon. And fundamentally, we're a group of people who get out of bed in the morning because we want to do our bit to face the global climate, food and energy crisis. So it's a team that's really motivated by the context that I've just described. And so our vision is very much about being the leading early stage developer of sustainable and transformative marine projects. So we're all about development, all about project development. But it isn't project development, I suppose, in terms of at any cost. What we want to really achieve, and I believe we absolutely are doing, is to be able to work with the oceans and with communities so that we can aspire to blue growth achievements and benefits across the board. So in terms of our business model, we focus, as I mentioned earlier, on floating wind, wave and low impact aquaculture projects. In relation to floating wind, earlier this year we signed a joint venture partnership with Total to deliver what will be the world's largest floating wind farm off the coast of Pembrokeshire. And I'll say a little bit more about floating wind in a moment and in the Irish context. We, I suppose as a company, our origins were actually back in 2011, looking at wave energy technology at the time and engaging in the Wave Hub initiative in Cornwall. I was on a presentation a couple of weeks ago with Donna Cagney from Ocean Energy Europe, and he described, I suppose, the journey towards the commercialization of wave technology as something that went through lots of highs and lows. And he described us as coming out of the trough of disillusionment. And I suppose really there has been a lot of expectations about wave energy. We know that it's an enormous opportunity for Ireland, but it's been a slow burn in terms of various technologies being able to progress through the various technology readiness levels. It's not to say the opportunity has gone away. It's not to say that the resource has changed. It's not to say that the job creation opportunities aren't there. But as somebody who really advocated very much for investment into critical research infrastructure back in whenever it was the end of the 1990s when we wrote proposals to PRTLI 5 at the time. You know, we really sold that picture of marine renewables for Ireland, and wave energy at the time was at the top of the list of what we thought would be coming on stream. The Beaufort building was constructed and Maritime was born, and there's a huge amount of capacity building that's been done at a national level over the last few years. And I think that certainly now, as a result of that capacity building, we can see a way forward with regards to wave energy. And certainly we'll see action in the decade ahead. We couldn't have foreseen at the time how floating wind, and we didn't see it coming, how quickly floating wind would become an opportunity for Ireland, and how fast that technology would evolve. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what that opportunity is looking like in just a moment. And also to mention that from the point of view of Simply Blue aquaculture, because aquaculture is quite an important theme today, that we are developing projects in Scotland that are using semi-closed systems to capture waste from the marine environment and to work towards more sustainable and low impact aquaculture solutions. So these are the areas in which we work. What I would say is the last major deliverable from my time in UCC was this report here. It's the Airwind Report. And this is essentially a blueprint for offshore wind in Ireland. And it outlines the extraordinary opportunity that we have because of this phenomenal offshore wind resource. It talks about, I suppose, unlocking that resource from the point of view of 3 offshore wind production zones. We have the Irish Sea production zone, where we see a huge amount of development underway and projects that have been prioritised by government with respect to bottom-fixed offshore wind technology. But in this Airwind report, we really focus in then on the Celtic Sea and the Atlantic with regards to floating wind technology. Ireland is a small island nation, and fundamentally we have a relatively small domestic electricity market. So we need to think about how can we harness this extraordinary resource, the fact that the technology now is really quickly moving to a commercial phase for floating wind, and to derive benefits that are fundamentally linked to route to market. So being able to get this wind to the market, which is beyond Ireland, which is into Europe and further afield, is an extraordinary opportunity for us as a small island nation. It deals with all our issues in relation to energy security, and floating wind technology and the deployment of floating wind technology opens up whole new perspectives, for example, for the west coast of Ireland. Floating wind is basically about floating foundations as opposed to foundations that are piled into the seabed as you would have traditionally had with bottom fixed. Floating wind technology goes into deeper waters, upwards of 60 meters, upwards of 1,000 meters and beyond. So the types of traditional constraints that you would have with bottom fixed, where there can be concerns about visual impact from the shore, are very much mitigated against with regards to the deployment of floating wind, because typically it can be at and over and beyond the horizon. The Irish government has indicated in the programme for government an ambition to deploy 30 gigawatts of floating wind from the Atlantic. Now that's quite an extraordinary ambition, and it's a huge target. Bear in mind where we are at the moment. We have 25 megawatts of offshore wind, which is the Arklow Bank, developed in Ireland right now. We're trying to go from 0 to hero in the next decade, insofar as trying to achieve the targets for 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. That will be largely in the Irish Sea, but we can envisage and do envisage projects in the Celtic Sea starting to pave the way for how we unlock floating wind ultimately for the Atlantic. The Airwind study talks about, I suppose, the enormous opportunities that comes with that whole vision. It talks about by 2030, we did a whole socioeconomic assessment, upwards of 8,000 jobs for a 6.5 gigawatt scenario. It's about high quality jobs. It's about reimagining ports and harbours, for example, around the west coast. The deployment of these floating wind turbines requires very significant investment into port infrastructure. Ports such as Shannon Foynes would be very, very well placed to facilitate that type of a scenario. And lots of ports and harbours around the coast could reposition themselves as operations and maintenance bases for this type of operation into the future. It's not a panacea. There's huge challenges in terms of really bringing the community with us with regards to the deployment of this type of new energy and this energy transition piece for Ireland. It's about looking at how to make sure we can coexist with other marine users, with the fisheries sector. And it's about looking at that marine space through the lens of marine spatial planning to think about the opportunity for co-location, for example, of offshore wind with aquaculture or co-location with marine protected areas. So there is just such a huge new wave of opportunities coming with this prospect. And just to give an idea about how this converts into something more tangible and maybe more real, Simply Blue Energy are in a process to deliver the Emerald project. So this is our vision for floating wind in the Celtic Sea. This proposes a 1 gigawatt floating wind farm in the vicinity of the Kinsale gas platform. The Kinsale gas field is in a process of being decommissioned. So this is very much a story of the energy transition. So going back to the very first slides about the context in which we operate, the huge crisis that we are experiencing in terms of climate, the need to decarbonize our economy. And we can do that. We can achieve the jobs, we can achieve the growth, we can achieve the sustainability with this opportunity. So the images here on the screen are showing basically the old and the new in terms of the Kinsale field, moving away from fossil fuels, moving away from gas, and being able to introduce a new vision with regards to floating wind turbines in and around that area. That's an area that we selected for a number of reasons, because of the resource, but the attractiveness of the site in terms of that energy transition piece and almost a post-industrial landscape with regards to infrastructure that's there and the acceptability of that area in terms of the way it has been used for, I suppose, energy thus far. So the proposal for a 1 gigawatt floating wind farm is at an early stage. We submitted an application for a foreshore site investigation license, and we are in the consultation phase of that at the moment. That allows us to look at landfall for cable routes and so on within the 12 nautical miles. But of course, like with everybody else in the marine world looking to develop any kind of a project, we are anxiously awaiting and anticipating the enactment of the Marine Planning and Development Management Bill. We understand that there's a lot of resources at the government level being put behind that. I would urge that those resources stay focused on that and that we deliver the Marine Planning and Development Management Act in Q1 of 2021, which is the target that is outlined in the programme for government. So we're at an early stage with this. We're working through the existing consenting legislation, and we anticipate that the new regime coming on stream next year. The site, in terms of distance to shore, the nearest point is 35 kilometres. These projects aren't for the faint-hearted. This is a 10-year timeline in terms of development, and there are full details available on the emeraldfloatingwind.com website that's just listed below. So that's a vision for floating wind. You know, I think that the west coast of Ireland, as I said, the Atlantic Ocean is really where the action arena will be for this whole sector going forward. But it's about being able to walk before you can run, because of course the conditions are more extreme. The Met Ocean conditions in particular are more challenging. That has implications in terms of cost of technology, and the sector is very much trying to drive down those costs so we can open up those new frontiers and deliver the benefits of floating wind. In the meantime, I mentioned that wave technology is part of our business model. We have a strategic partnership with Core Power, a Swedish technology developer. And this is very much a very exciting technology. We've been doing a lot of horizon scanning in relation to wave energy technology. The Core Power Ocean wave technology is looking to be certified by 2024. And we can see in terms of the technology development here that there would be a real prospect of moving from the deployment of full-scale single models in Portugal, which is underway with this technology at the moment, to arrays of these technologies off the west coast. And in terms of project development, this is something that we'll be, I suppose, getting more proactive on into the future. Wave power is absolutely part of our vision. And just to come back around to the aquaculture, I mentioned the semi-closed systems and the technology that we're most interested in, I suppose, developing projects to accommodate. This is really a Scottish play because this technology lends itself to the more benign locks and I suppose calmer waters that you can get in Scotland, as opposed to the more I suppose extreme types of conditions that we have here in Ireland. But I put it in here as a placeholder because fundamentally, we are interested as a company in relation to aquaculture, and as I mentioned earlier on, potentially the co-location of aquaculture with offshore wind into the future. I'll finish up with this slide. This is really just quite a visionary slide. It's a busy slide, but it's really, it's a new, I suppose, concept for thinking about our ocean space. And I think critically, we need to be having those discussions about what it is we want into the future. Do we want to deal with those huge issues that I outlined at the start in terms of biodiversity and climate? Do we want to be part of the energy transition as a country? Do we want to seize this extraordinary opportunity and change the prospects of communities and provide livelihoods for our young people, not just in Dublin and data centres, but with a quality of life on the West Coast too? And the marine provides us with that opportunity, and certainly Simply Blue Energy are motivated to do our part in an Irish context. So gur míle maith agat Mícheál, tá mé críochna inis.
Gur mágat, Val, an the hímúr ar fad. Very interesting. Lots of questions come to my mind on this, and just want to encourage people just to put in some questions on the Q&A. People are still putting in questions back to Mark, but it'd be nice to get some questions for Val as well. But just to get us going, Val, one of them is in relation to the talk you've given, but maybe just to start off, this idea that we're talking about a marine cluster. You've been working in the marine now for donkey's years and so on, and so you know what a marine cluster is like. How important is that, particularly given what you've just said there, that the developments have been slow and that we're waiting for regulations? There's a sense that, it's 4 years for Portnamara, it's 10 years possibly for some of these floating wind developments to happen. What function could the marine cluster play? How important would it be? And would you see yourselves, Simply Blue, being an active part of such a marine cluster? Thanks.
Okay. I'm starting to feel very old here, because I was wondering when Mark talked about old friends earlier on, and now we were talking about donkey's years. But time flies when you're having fun. And it has been an amazing journey, and certainly part of it has been very much being active in terms of marine clusters, leading the IMERC cluster here in Cork, which gave rise to the Beaufort Building and the Maritime Centre, and the joined up thinking with the National Maritime College and the Naval Service a number of years ago. And so I can absolutely recognise the value of clusters for a number of reasons. It's very much about trying to ensure this triple helix piece comes together. So it's really about the government, the industry, the civil society and the academic groups not working in their silos, but it's trying to mix that up so that you get that diversity of thought and you get those new opportunities that are related to, I suppose, innovation aspects of clusters. That's the first thing. The second point in relation to clusters and why they're important and effective is because of critical mass. So instead of having lone voices, you have an opportunity to achieve critical mass in terms of a position, for example, from the members of any one cluster, and that can be a powerful thing. And the third thing in terms of a cluster is that it provides an opportunity for networking. So you mentioned earlier on the virtual aspect of the cluster. That's hugely important, but what is critical to the success of that is the facilitation. Clusters don't happen by themselves by magic just because you've introduced people. It's very much about facilitating a really, I suppose, active engagement process. So I think, Mícheál, in terms of what Portnamara is all about, it ticks the boxes absolutely in terms of, number one, having a vision, having a potentially unifying vision that lots of different stakeholders can get in behind, including the stakeholders from all parts of the triple helix. It also has some unique selling points. Its geostrategic location and outlook. with regards to the Gaeltacht. And also, I think the physical aspect of it, the hub or the nucleus that's envisaged by the planning permission and the Kilkieran campus, essentially, that Mark outlined earlier on. So Park Namara, absolutely, you know, from the point of view of Simply Blue Energy, would it be relevant and interesting to us? Yes, because it provides us as a small company here with connectivity to a community that's fundamental and critical to our success going forward. If we have, and I hope we will have, that opportunity to develop projects off the west coast of Ireland, then having a cluster to work with and through would be critical to our success and to that pathway.
Thanks very much, Val. Just 3 questions, and I might put them all out and see if you'd like to deal with them together, because there's a connection between them all. I think one of them is from Jerry Flynn, who would have worked, I think, with folks we talked about earlier, Gillian Mills, in the Ocean Focus. And the question he asked was, it's responding to you were saying about the Maritime Bill, and there's a fair bit of resources being put into it now. So his question was, what more resources do you think are needed, really, at this stage? Is it resources in the parent department and Customs House? What technical resources are needed to make some of this vision happen? And then the second question, Martin O'Toole, is about living with coastal fishing communities. How do you see yourselves coexisting with coastal fishing communities? And maybe on that, you might comment on the programme on RT these days, the Southwesterlies, which is featuring an offshore wind company in a fishing village in West Cork and arousing the pub and so on. So talk to us about that. That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. I won't try and bundle them. I'll deal with them separately. So to Jerry Flynn's question first about resources, the Airwind report that I mentioned earlier on came up with a series of recommendations for this blueprint. The critical path that is identified is fundamentally about government being resourced to deliver the Marine Planning and Development Management Bill, but a whole range of other actions that are critical to setting us on this particular trajectory. We did a small study in relation to the, I suppose, the personnel across various governments, departments and agencies through the Airwind study. And I can't remember the exact number, so I won't hazard a guess, but we came up with a recommendation in terms of an increase of bandwidth that needed to be accommodated in the next 12 to 18 months. It was definitely upwards of about 20 new people, just for business as usual. And the key blocking points down the line that we envisage relate to strategic appointments into, for example, places such as on board Planola, because what you're going to see is a glut of applications coming through with regards to strategic infrastructure, and what we see is a lack of capacity and marine specific expertise to be able to deal with that and to make the decisions that are related to it. Other organisations that are so poorly served, the likes of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, again, absolutely critical to this area going forward. So that's maybe just my thought in relation to the bandwidth piece, and I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah. The other one that was on inshore fisheries.
Fishing. Yeah. So fishing, absolutely, you know, so important in terms of livelihoods, so important as a sector that's hugely challenged, and I respect and see that in terms of COVID, in terms of quotas, and in terms of just sustaining fisheries going forward. So, you know, I think that, you know, from the point of view of a fishing community, to see now new activities coming into the marine space, or plans for new activities coming into the marine space, number one, it must be quite daunting, whether it's marine protected areas or whether it's strategic marine activity zones that the government is going to be designating, whether it's areas for offshore wind or anything else. But I suppose that's very much going back to the start of the presentation and thinking about that point that we have to reimagine. We have to look to the future, and together we have to find our way to be able to get the win-wins, to be able to coexist. From our point of view, I've spent 21 years, Micheál, as you know, a lot of my work has been about stakeholder engagement in communities. Looking at it from an academic lens, it's just been so important to me to bring that into Simply Blue Energy, and it's absolutely critical to our values that we would absolutely be on the ground, available, and have been going out to talk to the fishing community, whether it is in Union Hall or Baltimore or Cove, and all around the coast in relation to our Emerald project. Communication is vital. So it's about understanding really what's being proposed. When you go in for a foreshore site investigation application, you have to show the area that you're going to survey. So the line on the map looks massive because you have to survey a big area to go from this to being very specific about where your sites and your turbines are going to be. So communication to make sure that there's no misunderstanding about what's been envisaged is critical. And, you know, absolutely, if there's anybody from the fishing community on this call and would like to contact me directly and to follow up, I'd absolutely 100% open and really pleased to do that. The last one I'll deal with very quickly because I'd say you're watching the time. Southwesterlies. Goodness, I think it's fantastic to have the topic in mainstream TV. Again, for that whole point about communication, awareness and understanding. I'm not a TV critic, but I just, the script just unfortunately is not so exciting. And of course the issue is critical, but the story,
so you're not a consultant on the script?
I'm not a fan. I don't want to say that in such a big forum. I appreciate the effort that goes into those productions, but maybe it'll find its way in the next few episodes.
Right.
We'll see.
There's one other question, but I think time doesn't allow us to go into it, but maybe you might put something on chat if you have chance, Val, which is, sure. What do you think will be the impact of Brexit? Because you mentioned that you're doing work in Scotland and particularly a new project in Wales. Is that good or bad for Ireland? What's the impact? But rather than go into it now, you might just type a reply. So Val, Gurmil Magat, the Holy Ghost hasn't disappointed us. So well done. Slán go fóill. Talk to you again. Okay. So the third speaker this morning is